Hey up! If you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you'll know that I have a passion for wristwatches, automatic wristwatches. In fact, any mechanical timepiece gets my attention. Now, I usually save these videos as rainy day projects, and yesterday was the rainiest day I've known in a long time. All the local roads turned into rivers, and even my driveway where I normally film was a lake. So I decided it was time to get this particular project off the shelf and get on with it for today's video. My attraction to these objects is as much subconscious as it is conscious. In fact, to a large extent, I don't really know what the attraction is, or at least I've never really been able to express it in words. I watched an interview here on YouTube with a lady called Rebecca Struthers a few weeks ago. She's an accomplished watchmaker. In fact, she owns her own watchmaking company that makes some very exclusive and expensive bespoke timepieces. But not only is she a qualified watchmaker, she's a qualified horologist. And what I mean by that is she has numerous degrees in the subject of horology, and she lectures all over the world. And listening to her in that interview, it was like someone was clicking all those lost pieces of a jigsaw into place for me. I mean, often while I'm making these videos, or should I say after I've published these videos, in the comments section you get a lot of people sort of poo-pooing the idea of wearing a wristwatch or using any sort of timepiece at all, because time doesn't matter to them. They're self-employed or they're retired or whatever, but they simply never give time a thought. Time simply isn't important, and I mean, I've never sort of responded to any of these comments because that's a load of rubbish. And in this interview, she sort of explained why. I mean, the subject of horology is far deeper than I ever thought it was. And she explained how, you know, the concept of time and the concept of recording or tracking time is one of the major factors which aided the advancement of human beings. Basically, if we didn't have that concept of time, and if we hadn't had that desire to track time, we would never have got to where we are now. Agriculture would never have been successful. Industry would never have existed. Literally, everything we take for granted in our modern lives would never have been possible without that ability to track time. And one thing that did strike me, a statement that she made in that interview, is that the mechanical wristwatch is the most efficient machine mankind has ever created. There are 86,400 seconds in a single day. Yet these tiny little machines, powered simply by a spring, are able to track each of those seconds with 99.9% accuracy, just powered by a spring, a piece of metal. With even a modestly priced automatic or mechanical wristwatch, like the one that I'm going to show you today, having an error rate which is in single figures, lower single figures, per day. Now, Tom at TUS Watches got in touch with me just over a month ago about one of the latest releases of an Orient sports watch known as the Mako Mark III. Now, of all the sort of different types of wristwatch that are available on the market today, the dive watch is probably the most suited to motorcycle because they're built like tanks. Simply put, they're around the toughest wristwatches available on the market. So Tom asked me if I would wear this watch for a month, normal day-to-day daily life running of the channel, and then perhaps publish a video explaining how this watch had fared in what is a fairly rough lifestyle. Just the kind of project I like. So, apart from the odd day here and there, over the last month I've worn this watch exclusively working on bikes, pulling bikes apart, rebuilding parts of them, fitting parts to them. And although I haven't gone out of my way to cause any damage to this watch, I certainly haven't babied it. It's taken some significant bangs and knocks, and in some ways this watch lends itself very well to proving a point that I've sort of wanted to bring up for quite some time regarding metal finishes on watches, or anything else for that matter. Because every single watch channel that's ever mentioned watch finishing has always made what I consider to be one of the biggest mistakes, one of the biggest assumptions, based on ignorance more than anything else, without actually knowing much about the subject. Because they will all tell you that a polished watch case is easier to damage and shows up damage more than a brushed finish. And, you know, any tool watch, which is what a dive watch is, should be brushed finished because it doesn't show up the marks. And I'll tell you now, that's one of the most misleading myths, not just in the world of watches, but in the world of metal finishing that exists. Now, this is the Mako 3 in its dirty, straight off the wrist after a month of wear state. Just to tell you a little bit about this watch, obviously it's a dive watch with 200 meters water resistance. It has a 42mm case size, the case being made of a 316 alloy stainless steel, which is fairly typical of the watch industry. It has a fairly chunky crown, which is signed and is protected by crown guards. Now, this is a good thing because it makes it easier to manipulate when you're adjusting the time or whatever, and it is a screw down crown to maximise water resistance. The bezel's unidirectional, which means it only turns one way, that's counterclockwise. It's made of stainless steel as well, with a serrated edge, which is quite easy to use actually. It has a loomed pip at the 12 o'clock position, and the bezel insert is made from an anodised aluminium. This particular ivory or champagne variant has a green surround on the bezel insert with a very sort of faded, almost ginger gold 15-minute zone. Now, unfortunately, due to the weather conditions, we were having frequent blackouts while I was filming this, so I had to use natural daylight, which wasn't very good. So you're probably better using TUS's website for a better idea of the colour rendition. I'll leave links in the video description for this and the other colour variants on this watch. Tom at TUS gave me a choice of which model to review, and I couldn't resist this champagne dial version. It is a gorgeous dial. In the sunlight it has a really nice sunburst effect, really well executed. The time is indicated by two polished sword-shaped hands, both of which are sort of very generously loomed, with a polished second hand that has a loomed arrow at the end, which is also outlined in orange. At the 3 o'clock position you have what is fairly typical of Orient watches, a day and date complication with a polished metal frame. The Mako's powered with Orient's famous reliable workhorse, the F6922 movement. This, like every other Orient watch that I either own or have tried out in the past, gives me an accuracy of -3 seconds per day. That's fairly typical of Orient. It's either -3 or up to +3 seconds a day, which is actually within COSC specification, although these watches are not COSC certified. One thing that I have noticed about this F6922 movement in the past is that it is quite a torquey movement, and it doesn't really seem to matter what sort of use the watch is put to, you know, whether you take it off on a night time, whether you put it on a winder, or whether you wear it all the time, or even riding long hours on a single cylinder 500cc motorcycle while you're touring. It still seems to give the same accuracy without any variation, which is quite unusual for most watches. The dial is a pretty classic configuration now, which was well used in the 1950s by most watch manufacturers, although we tend to think of it more as the preserve of the likes of Rolex with the Explorer or Amiga with the Seamaster these days. All the indices are applied with a polished metal border, and again generously filled with lume. We have Arabic numerals at the 12, 6 and 9 o'clock position, with rectangular arrowed markers in between. The 3 o'clock position obviously taken up by the day-date complication. It's a classic dial layout, one of my all-time favourites to be honest. The dial's protected by a flat and very scratch-resistant sapphire crystal, and I believe this is the first time that a Mako model has been graced with a sapphire crystal. The stainless steel bracelet is the usual affair that we see on Orient dive watches. It's basically the same design. Although in this case the ends of the links have all been polished and there is some polishing on the clasp. It's pressed steel. It's basic, but it's strong, durable. I personally find it comfortable on the wrist. This watch is way under £300 at TUS prices. And although it's clear that Orient have spent most of the money on the watch head, in my view the bracelet doesn't let it down. I've seen worse bracelets on watches that were twice the price. Now, as you can see in this watch's grubby, uncleaned state, the sides of the case are polished, with just a little bit of brushing on the face. I've got no idea where this myth came from, but most watch reviewers will tell you that, a true tool watch to hide marks and scratches should all be brushed and not polished. They present the illusion that somehow a brushed finish on, any watch case will make it more durable. It doesn't. In fact, it's quite the opposite. For a start, brushing is a very precise directional treatment for metal. So even the lightest scratch that goes across the grain on that pattern will stick out like a sore thumb. Brushing basically involves scratching the metal, so you will have peaks and troughs in that pattern. The peak being, the top part of the metal that's been left exposed as they've gouged out the deeper part of the metal to make the pattern. So this creates a weakness in the metal finishing. That brushing will be far more susceptible to damage than a polished surface. The higher the polish on a metal like stainless steel, the higher the lubricity of the metal surface, so it will be naturally less susceptible to scratching. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it makes the metal scratch proof, but it does make it less susceptible to scratching, and when it does get scratched, it's not as in your face as it is with a brushed finish. Not only that, it's much easier to deal with. A brushed finish on something like a watch head is a very specialised treatment, virtually impossible to replicate, certainly at home, and even some watchmakers will struggle unless they're prepared to completely dismantle the watch and properly refinish it using the correct machinery. Getting a scratch out of a polished surface is much easier. You just polish it. You've got no other finishes to match up to other than a brilliant shine, which is pretty easy to obtain even at home using something like Cape Cod polishing system, or even a watchmaker's buffing stick. It's child's play and it doesn't take long. Polished watch heads are a rare thing these days, but give me a polished one over a brushed one any day. The sides of a watch case are the most susceptible to scratching, especially the crown side. It's just the way the human body works during normal day-to-day life. These are the edges that are going to come into contact, sharp contact, with other objects like door handles and motorcycle frames or foot pegs when you're working on them. And as a testament to that hard, polished surface that Orient have thought to put into this watch, the Mako has stood up to a month of abuse really well. There are no scratches that I can see, and I haven't polished this watch, I just cleaned it. Right, so in conclusion, this rather affordable Mako 3 from Orient, like a lot of Orient watches, punches way above its price point for both performance and quality. High quality at an affordable price is a sales pitch we often hear, and Orient are one of the few companies that actually deliver on that promise by the bucket load. They are unbeatable. Now, if I've got one criticism, and it's a very small one, the loom on this watch is great, don't get me wrong, but early in the morning when that loom is almost exhausted, and this is a feature of champagne or ivory dialed watches, especially when they have polished hands. Under the light of dawn, a sort of a twilight lighting situation, contrast between the polished hands and the numerals is very poor and difficult to read. It's just that 15-20 minute period early in the morning when I have found it difficult to tell what time it is. But that's the only criticism I have of this Mako 3, and it's a small one. Right, I will leave links to all the different colour variants in the video description down below. I hope you all have a great weekend. If you're riding, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.